Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books. We're very happy to be with you this evening for another installment of the Austin Community College Creative Writing Department's Literary Coffeehouse, an open mic. Our host is Charlotte Gulick, chair of the Creative Writing Department at ACC, and their featured reader tonight is Dalia Azim. Charlotte, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Becky, and thank you to Joe. And just to clarify, Becky, what is Malvern? If I wanted to shop at Malvern right now, how would I do that?
Thank you for asking, Charlotte. So currently with Austin at stage 5, we're doing personal shopping appointments. So we keep the front door locked. If you want to make sure you can get in to see us, feel free to just go to our website. You can make a personal shopping appointment and that will give you access to the store for half an hour on your own. If you just want to drop by, if there's no one else, if we have no appointments in the store, we'll be happy to let you in. But it's kind of, on that is more of a catch as catch can, because we do try to limit the number of people in the store. We're just really careful. And of course, if anybody comes in, we do require masks for entry. And we'll also do curbside pickup. If you just want to call and get something, we're happy to bring it out to you.
And I could also call and say, Becky, I feel like reading a family saga, but that's a little uplifting. That's something you all could, or I need a new poet in my life. That's something you could help me with, right?
Yes, very good. Thank you, Charlotte. Yes, we're happy to give recommendations. Our staff is just, they're wonderful. They know the collection so well. And hey, you know, Joe and I take a good shot at that too. They've tried to help out. But yeah, we love to give recommendations. And then we also have a lot on our website. If people want to check out our website, our webmaster Tracy does a wonderful job of kind of highlighting some of the staff favorites, books of the day, and then we have bundles of books that were kind of theme oriented that we put together. And so, yeah, check out our website, give us a call. We're always happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Becky. And I'm thinking Valentine's Day is coming up and people might need some really good gifts to give, some really thoughtful and, so.
Wonderful. Yes. Thoughtful gifts, journals. We have wonderful journals. We have lots of great books and we have wonderful cards, if I may say so myself. And I say that because I buy the cards. I love the cards. And so we do have a lot of those available too. And so, yeah, we have a lot of ideas in terms of gift giving and books available.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Charlotte Gulick. As Becky said, I'm chair of the Creative Writing Department at Austin Community College. I think 90% of the people who are here tonight are students in classes there or have been students, so it's really nice. We're really grateful to Malvern Books for co-partnering with us as we move forward in COVID. We used to do these in person. Someday we'll return. But we just really want to encourage folks. I think one of the best ways that you can show up as a literary citizen is to buy books. So support Malvern if you can. We do have our next Literary Coffeehouse reader lined up, and that is Adam Soto, and that will be on March 21st. And this is our first of 2022. So Happy New Year, everybody. Woo! And I'm so excited to celebrate Dalia Azim's presence with us. She's going to read to us, and I'll read her bio in just a second. But she has a book coming out on April 12th. And again, as literary citizens, what can we do for people is we can show up when they have book events, or we can give them reviews, or we can let other people know about a really important, beautiful book that's coming into the world very soon, and we can do our very best to support it. So Dalia, thank you for being here, and I'll do your official bio now. Dalia Azim was born in Canada and raised in the United States. Her work has appeared in many different journals, including American Short Fiction, Aperture, Columbia, a Journal of Literature and Art, Glimmer Train, where she received their Short Story Award for New Writers, Other Voices, and the Washington Post. Her first book, Country of Origin, will be published by A Strange Object, Deep Vellum, in April. She is the manager of special projects at the Blanton Museum of Art in Austin, Texas. She previously worked as a researcher at the, I can never say this word, Dedalus Foundation as a curator and as a curatorial assistant at the Museum of Modern Art, both in New York City. She graduated with a dual degree in art and literature from Stanford University and grew up in Colorado. So please send your silent applause to Dalia and welcome, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Okay, am I unmuted? I think I'm unmuted.
Sound
thank
great.
you so much. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to Charlotte, and thanks to Becky and Joe. I love the writing community in Austin. It's really sustained me. I see a lot of familiar faces or pictures of friends in the grid tonight, and I really appreciate that. I know we all have to be cautious. At the same time, I can't wait to get back into Malvern. I love the events there. I have a lot of fond memories of sitting in that beautiful space and being a literary citizen myself. Thanks for that kind of guidance. I think that's really helpful. So I'm going to read from toward the beginning of my book, so that should be relatively spoiler free, but just to set it up a little bit. When the book opens in 1952, Cairo is on fire. They're in the midst of a revolution trying to oust the British, and I will start from there. My father first enlisted in the military in 1937, the year I was born, when it didn't seem as though the war in Europe was going to expand to encompass Egypt and the Middle East. I have no memory of his long absences in 1940 and 1942, when he was called to fight off first the British, called to fight off first an Italian offensive alongside British troops, followed by two separate confrontations with a faction of Hitler's army that advanced to within 150 miles of Cairo. He was already a seasoned veteran by the time he was called upon to fight against Israel in 1948. And as a colonel then, he led hundreds of men to battle. After that, my father joined a faction of the military known as the Free Officers, and it was the leaders of this group who'd taken control of Egypt after the coup. Some of these officers met at our house on occasion, or at least I assume that the men in uniform who gathered in my father's office were also members of the organization. They were all professionals in the military, and yet they met in secret outside of work. My father had let on that these gatherings weren't totally above board, but the men made so much noise when they got together, laughing and telling loud stories, screaming over one another, that they didn't seem too worried about being discreet. At first, I'd found these gatherings annoying, macho and obnoxious, a private boys' club. But once I started paying attention to the words filtering up through the floorboards, I grew quite curious. The problem is that our people are lazy. We've allowed ourselves to be ruled by imperialists for thousands of years. We need reform. We need justice for the poor and hungry. The problem is that most of our population is deprived. You young men, I heard my father say, so idealistic. Let's focus on getting he began, and then lowered his voice, losing me. One night while my father had a group over, I decided to go downstairs and see what I could overhear from the kitchen. Noticing the light on behind Rima's door, I moved past quietly. When I turned on the light in the kitchen, I saw spotless counters, the sink empty, all the dishes and glasses put away. It was amazing to me that Rima could pray or listen to the radio or whatever she was doing in her room, the way the laughter and ruckus inside my father's office reverberated down the hall. It also baffled me how these men managed to have such a good time together, and their alliance originated during a war that had gone so horrifically for their side. I suspected that alcohol fueled their good moods, a theory developed from watching people carouse on film. I'd never actually seen my father consume alcohol, though I'd found several bottles in a cabinet in his office. Drinking was forbidden according to the Quran, and it upset me that my father would choose to flout this divine decree. I think it's time for another round, I heard someone shout from the boys' club, confirming my suspicions. A few echoed their agreement. Glasses clinked together. Annoyed, I decided to get some fresh air. For the first time in a long time, when I stepped onto the roof, the stink of the chicken coops was the first scent to greet me. It had been months since the fires, yet the acrid stench of burned matter lingered in the air, though not as perceptibly that night. It was a cloudy evening, the stars hidden behind a veil of gray. I visited the chickens first, answering their anxious squawks. I petted the docile ones and kept my fingers out of the cages of the ones who bit. Despite living in the same conditions, they responded very differently to life, much like people, I reflected, which made me wonder what I would be like as a bird. The door to the roof creaked open, startling me. I turned around expecting to see Rima, but instead found a young man in uniform standing there. "Oh," he said when he saw me, his eyes opening wide like an owl's. "I'm sorry, I didn't expect to find anyone up here." "It's my house," I felt inclined to state, though the words sounded silly coming out of my mouth. "Of course," he said, backing up, I'll leave." "No," I answered with more force than intended. "You don't have to go." He stood there looking at me. I couldn't tell in the dark, but guessed that his eyes were brown. "I'm a friend of your father's," he offered. "How do you know I'm his daughter?" I asked, suddenly self-conscious to be standing next to a bunch of chickens. I'd probably look like I was talking to them when he first walked outside. I wondered how I came across to people. How did he know that I wasn't a servant? People often said that I looked like my father, which made me worry that I was manly and unattractive. I'd inherited his broad shoulders, wide hips, olive skin, and thick eyebrows, instead of my mother's conventionally pretty features, a slight build and pale complexion, and thin eyebrows that she had to augment with paint. The stranger chuckled quietly. "Good guess?" "How do you know my father?" I asked. "We fought together in the war," the young officer said. "I was in his unit." I felt a sharp twinge of sympathy, knowing what this meant. My father's campaigns had gone famously poorly, and very few from his company had survived, making the man standing before me one of the chosen ones. "Anyway, I probably shouldn't be talking to you," he continued. "I don't want to disrespect your father." "I'm not his property," I answered, an impulse, though technically I was, according to the Quran. Even in the dark, I could see the subtle gesture of the stranger's eyebrows rising skyward. "I wasn't saying," he said. "If I were in America, I could talk to anyone I wanted," I argued, though I wasn't certain this was right. Was it just female characters in movies who were liberated? Or were real women also free to live lives outside of the control of husbands and fathers? "Are you planning to move to America anytime soon?" asked the soldier with a twinkle of amusement. "Why not?" I demanded, knowing I sounded foolish. "You can get there by plane now." He laughed and told me that his name was Khalil. "I wasn't going to come tonight," he followed with, "but I'm so glad that I did." "Why are you up here anyway?" I asked, trying to turn the attention away from myself. Khalil reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigarette and pack of matches. "I'd offer you one," he told me, "but then your father would definitely have my head." Recalling those moments on the roof added new excitement to my days. It was amazing how quickly the minutes passed when I thought about Khalil. The details of his physical appearance were hazy in my memory, as they weren't very clear that night to begin with. He had a medium build, neither a very tall nor small man. He hadn't been wearing his cap, and I could see that his hair was thick and had some wave to it. I guessed that he was in his 20s, much closer to my age than most men I encountered. I had a couple of male cousins who were within my age range, and I'd felt pulses of attraction for them too. Maybe this was why society worked so hard to keep attractive men and women apart. I thought about Khalil so much that it almost felt like a sickness. "You go up there too much," Rima called after me as I headed up the stairs to the roof one afternoon. I paused on the fourth step but didn't answer. It was true that I went up more frequently since I'd met Khalil, as it was the best place to steep in the details of our encounter. Undeterred by Rima's criticism, I continued climbing. There they were, the charred remains of downtown again. They had made no evident progress on rebuilding, though all the visible debris had been cleared away. A couple of weeks later, my father announced over supper that there was a man he wanted me to meet. He served in the war and has a house on the Red Sea, In addition to a building in Cairo, he explained as he chewed a mouthful of stewed beef. His mother lives on the bottom floor, which I think is a good indication of the kind of man he is. My chin quivered and I clasped my hands together in my lap. Clearly it wasn't Allah guiding my fate, but my father who had complete control. It sickened me to think of myself as a prize that he was pawning off to the highest bidder. Don't you have anything to say? My father asked. I stared through him into my bleak future, unable to move or answer. Come on, my mother said, her voice pinging against the side of my head. No one's died. Pull yourself together and answer your father. I clasped my hands tighter, digging my nails into my palms. Does it even matter what I think? I managed meekly. You're not the first girl in history who's had to get married, my mother answered. Don't be so dramatic. My father used this time to get a few more bites down. Even when he wasn't talking, he chewed with his mouth open, exposing his masticated food. I'm not being dramatic, I argued, turning to face my mother. I felt blood coursing through my body, reviving me. I just don't understand the rush. Why are you being so dense? We just had this conversation the other day. My mother's voice was high-pitched and grating. Calm down, Nafisa, my father told her. We're just talking. There's no reason for anyone to get emotional. Isn't there? I asked with tears in my eyes. Aren't we talking about my future here? I heard my mother sigh contemptuously, my attention on my father now. You should know that I only want what's best for you, he said. I couldn't tell if the emphasis in the statement was on his intentions or on what I should have known. I mumbled. I would never allow you to be with someone who I didn't think was good enough, he added. I have very high standards. I nodded, my thoughts racing, unfocused. How old is he? I muttered. My father stilled his jaw in the midst of chewing. I watched the elevator of his throat rise and fall as he swallowed. For some reason, this seemed like a difficult question to answer. 45, he finally said. Feeling a sickening twinge in my belly, I stood up from the table. My father wanted to marry me off to a man older than himself, someone 3 times my age. I pushed back my chair as my stomach sent another warning signal and hurried off, aware of the murmur of my parents' bafflement trailing behind me. I could think of nowhere to go except my room, so I went upstairs. No one in my life seemed to have loving marriages, so the prospect frankly terrified me. My parents, Rima, aunts and uncles, nobody I knew appeared to truly love their spouses. I wished that living at home indefinitely were an option for me, which had less to do with my parents and everything to do with Rima. Short of that, I fantasized about being one of those modern women in movies who lived in her own apartment, but I knew that my parents would never support such an unconventional choice, mostly because of how it would reflect on them. I don't want to be one of those women everyone feels sorry for because her daughter can't find a husband, my mother had remarked more than once, scarring me in my youth. The next day, I appealed to Rima for help. There's nothing I can do, she answered in a hushed, cautious tone. She'd been married off at 14 and already had 2 kids by the time she was my age. She was 31 now, which seemed old to me, nearly twice my age. I turned to my mother next, though I knew she was unlikely to be an ally. Her door was closed. I knocked softly and waited for an invitation to enter. I found her seated at her vanity, at the center of a triptych of mirrors. My mother was one of those women who believed in putting on a full face of makeup every day, even if she had no plans to leave the house. My small rebellion was to wear a fresh face all the time, though my friends teased me for it. My mother's makeup struck me as vain armor, and I wanted to be more authentic, look more real. Approaching my mother at the vanity, I watched as she leaned toward one of the side mirrors and carefully outlined her right eye in kohl. Did you want to ask me something? She queried when our eyes met in the mirror. Hers were dramatically mismatched, one heavily outlined and the other still naked. Caught off guard by her directness, I forgot why I'd come to her. And then I remembered. I was thinking that maybe it's not the best time for me to be married, I said, breaking eye contact. With all of the unrest lately, maybe it's best we wait until everything settles down before we talk about suitors and all of that, I rattled on. When I tried to find her gaze in the mirror again, she was applying mascara to her eyelashes, making them thick and heavy and cartoonish. She angled her eyes to catch mine in the reflection. My gaze darted back and forth between her made-up and natural eyes. The one was striking yet intimidating, the other soft and gentle. I didn't know where to focus, which to trust. Replacing her mascara inside the box, my mother set it down and turned around to face me. We'll get 100 proposals for you now, she answered at last. Once you reach a certain age, men will assume that something must be wrong with you if you're not already married. What if I'm not ready to get married? I tried, my voice arching into a plea. My mother rolled her eyes. No girl ever feels ready, but what's the alternative? To end up a spinster? No one wants that. I left her room feeling worse than when I'd entered. After closing the door behind me, I went to my room and shut myself inside, where I climbed face down onto the bed and cried into the cloud of my pillow. Thank you.
Thank you. So many amazing things in that. But can I ask you to hold up the copy of the book?
Yeah. Let's see.
So is that as an advanced reader's copy?
That's an advanced reader's copy. I think hopefully the big shipment's on a boat somewhere or leaving port somewhere. Should be here in hopefully by March.
Just for people who are unfamiliar with it, that term gets called an ARC, right? So people would be reading the ARCs for reviews and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of fun to like be in on it with you and like this, there. The book that's in front of you, will there be any changes? Like, are there still some final copy edits or?
You know, it's funny. So this was like, we did a really early set of ARCs just for something that the publisher wanted to submit it to. And that's what I have here. I gave away the precious copies I've had of all of them, just because like you said, they're there for, for getting people to write blurbs or for, promotion, etc. So I was skipping over some parts that I knew were like copy edited, or my editor said, actually a mascara would not go in a tube in 1952. So so it has changed a little bit. And yeah, I work on a lot of books in my job at the Blanton too. And it's kind of wild how much you catch in that process once it's already been typeset, but it's important to just keep going through it carefully over and over again. And I'm scared, conversely, like what happens when I see the final copy, I'm probably going to want to change something. It'll be too late, but I guess we all experience that, right? And that's when you start like marking up your copy and see what edit it today.
So I think it's so interesting for people who haven't been at this point before, just to dig in a little bit, like your editor didn't know about the mascara tube, but a copy editor did?
No, actually, it was my editor, Jill Myers, who was one of the founders of A Strange Object. I just think that and this is one thing I really admired, like she just, every time she read it so closely. And I think once like the big stuff is fixed, you can really start to focus on the more minute things. And I've just, every time I've been really grateful for her catches. Nobody wants to have anachronisms. And so they're small things, but I'm really glad that she found them. And so that was her, although I'll also say that Sarah Rutledge, who edits for Texas Monthly, was the editor on this book, and she was amazing. I edit for the Blanton, and I was like, I don't know if I'm a professional editor next to this person. So it takes a village, and I'm really grateful for my village.
Well, just think about the collaboration of it. And that's why we need editors on so many levels. Are you comfortable talking a little bit about how working with A Strange Object, did they help you get the book to arrive on the level you didn't know you wanted? Or like, can you talk a little bit about that editorial process? And because I think sometimes people think, oh, my book was accepted, maybe someone doesn't know that there's still a lot of editing that goes on after a book is accepted for publication. So if you could talk about that for a second, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd say that from the time it was acquired, and between that and like proofreading and copy editing, there was like 2 rounds of pretty big edits. Some of that was my editor pushing me in really helpful directions, but also there was just sort of like a panic that I felt. But I tend to, when I get distance, I tend to do a lot of rewriting. So the version that essentially sold, like there was a lot of changes, some of it structural, but a lot of line editing, a lot of cutting. And so there was like the first big round where there was a lot of changes. And then once it got cleaned up a little bit and rearranged, my editor came back, and with 2 chapters in particular, she was like, I really think this could benefit from like a start, that basically there was like a lot of throat clearing, or just a lot of like it just was dragging. And I think she was absolutely right, but it was hard, like 10 pages here, 10 pages there, that at that point I was like, this is it, this is the book. But she was right. And I'm just not a writer who digs in. Like I really am very open to criticism. I think it really helps. And I tend to agree when somebody tells me that something is wrong, and, or not wrong, but just that it could benefit from being tighter, or that this chapter would really just kind of take off if you started here instead of building in all this backstory. So yeah, I think that answered your question.
Beautifully. Thank you. So where would you say that the book was born? Like, was it a story you wrote, or a line that came to you, or a family story, or?
That's a little harder to answer. I think that it actually just finished another writer in our community in Austin, Shannon Perry, we've done an interview for the Rumpus, which was like really cathartic to write through this. And I kind of spelled it out a lot there. Basically, I started writing this book a long time ago, like 15 plus years ago. And at that time I was living in New York and had this sort of false idea that this Arab American story had to revolve around 9/11. And so that was my point of entry, but the book stops in the 80s now. And I just really started rewinding. And I really think I found like the heart of the novel when I went back a few generations. That being said, there were some characters in the book that were inspired by family stories. There's a character who ends up going to prison for a long time, and he's not an entirely innocent person, but it does seem like he's a political prisoner as well. And that's a story that really captivated my imagination in my own family. A couple of great uncles on my mother's side, one of whom was in the government, another person who was really active in the major political party. They didn't go to jail. I put my poor character in jail for 25 years. And they went to jail for like 5 and 10 years. Yeah, so there were things like that, but I came from all different things. My mom had read several versions. My parents grew up in Egypt. And so they were like a big source of my stories, along with my family on both sides. But my dad, he decided he really wanted to wait until it was like more of a final thing. And he just read it maybe a month or 2 ago. And he kept asking me questions, and I think was really moved by some ways that I'd taken facts, and it's all collage, right? Like there were things like the title, actually, he said, that's so funny. I never realized that was borrowed from my story, but it comes from basically somebody being denied a visa to remain in England and the reason is country of origin. My father's story is much less dramatic, but basically he was denied car insurance from Geico because of his country of origin. But there's just like taking these little snippets, and like figuring out ways to weave them in. So there's a lot of collage work in the book.
It's not funny that he was denied insurance, but I love hearing how you amplified that, like to dig in as a way to explore themes.
Definitely.
That's awesome. I have this one question I'm distracted by. Do you just like, as you're cruising along, the elevator of his throat, like was that a first line, or was that a revised line?
I think that was one of those, it's been in there for a long time. certain like kind of turns of phrase that, yeah, that would just sort of appear, not like magically, I mean, definitely deliberately from draft to draft. But like I was saying, I tend to like be really harsh on my revisions, but there were things that like, actually Jill Esbaum, who's another writer in town, said to me at one point, like, don't you have your book like memorized by now? This was a few years ago. And I didn't, but I feel like when I would go through revisions, there were things like just phrases like that I really like, that has to remain, and it would just rise to the top. So it was like in my consciousness, and it had been in through multiple layers of the book. And then there are things that, you know, hopefully I found some pretty phrases along the way and that are from the most recent drafts too. But that one I think was in there for a long time.
It's just amazing. So just a couple more questions. And for folks who are interested in doing the open mic, if you're interested in reading for 4 minutes, you can put your name in the chat and I'll call on you in a moment or a couple moments. So can you talk a little bit, and I'm sorry if you've talked about this elsewhere and if this is a repeat, but like what's it like to be in the visual art world and in the narrative world? How do those like interact? How do they harm and empower you?
I think it's mostly a really helpful dynamic. I mean, I think any kind of demanding day job will get in the way of writing, but I think, you know, the reality for what 99% of artists is that we have day jobs. And I think if you can find a day job that you really like, then it hopefully can feed your creative spirit. And I feel very much that way about having worked in the arts, which has been my career tracks pretty much since college. So I think it's like the heart of it is the same. It's people trying to get their voices through, like whether, you know, it's through visual art and at the Blanton at the Art Museum. But and you know, we're a whole staff that's like dedicated to like elevating and displaying artists' work. And so I think that it gives me sort of a realistic sense of like an artist's path too. Like I don't have a lot of illusions. I mean, I'm not a super young writer. So it's just like, you just learn, you know, there's all different paths and there's just different ways that people come to like their version of success. I don't know, I think that I have enough friends who are either work in publishing or in academia like yourself, Charlotte. And I think just because it was such a struggle to get published, as it is for a lot of people, it helped me to be distant. Like my career wasn't staked on it. So it really freed me up in a way that was like emotionally healthy, I think. I'm still super excited and it feels like, you know, an important moment of self-actualization to get this book out there. But having a separation from one career and the other has been actually, I think, really good for me.
Awesome. Thank you. So you kind of just hinted at this, but 15 years, I'm 15 years into a book. You know, some people in my life who are not writers are like, you're taking so long. It's like
not helpful, people.
It takes as long as it takes. But like, so there are a lot of people here, a variety of successes, you know, some publications, people trying to get into MFA programs, some people in MFA programs. Like what advice do you have for them, or do you not believe in advice for writers, or do you have anything that you could offer them for people who are maybe not at the point in the path where you are? I
think if it's a deep passion, you'll keep doing it. I think it's like an obsession, you know, nobody comes knocking on your door unless you're like, you know, very extraordinarily lucky. So I think that for me, so the best piece of advice is really to find your community, which I really feel like I hit upon that in Austin. I've lived in Austin basically for the tenure that I wrote this book. I feel like I might have stopped many times if it wasn't for the people in my life, the other writers in my life who were there for me, giving me feedback. I was inspired by their work. So I think it's to be a writer in isolation, like working on a book for a long time. I think, I don't know. I think I have a hard time imagining myself persevering through that. I'm sure there are people who would, but having other writers around me and sort of understanding the variety of people's experiences and just being inspired, being among a community of artists has been like really key in my journey.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much for reading for us tonight, and congratulations on the publication of your book. And how are you, this may be too nosy, but like, what's the thing you're going to do to celebrate?
Actually, it's a kind of a pre-celebration, but I'm about to go to the Galapagos, just like the trip of a lifetime. It was sort of started as a joke. My brother finished a PhD program and he and my dad went to Patagonia. And I was like, I just finished a book. Where's my trip? And so we're going in a couple of weeks. So I feel like that does kind of mark this, like the ending point of the story in some ways. I do hope that there'll be I know that there will be some events virtually, hopefully a few in person. I'm just excited to like share the book with people. It's already been so rewarding just with the ARCs, like you mentioned, the advanced readers copies, just having it out there and getting feedback from people has just been amazing. So I feel like it's kind of an ongoing celebration until, the negative Goodreads or Amazon reviews comes back. But, I'll try to ignore that.
Yeah, don't read those. Or you could be like, I'll look at them from the Galapagos.
Right.
That sounds so exciting.
I'm really excited.
And nice self-advocacy. You got Patagonia. Yeah. I got a book.
Father-son trip. What about the father-daughter trip?
So awesome. Thank you so much for spending some time with us tonight. I really appreciate it. Yay. So there's some comments in the chat. So thank you, audience, for being here. And I think most of the chat is people signing up for reading. One moment. Let me see. The chat has disappeared for me. So that's not exciting. I think Susan